Okay, folks, I apologize for the tardy start here. We've given you 5 minutes to chat with your neighbors at your seats, and this podium is very close to this wall back here. But that's good. I'll fade into the background because we're going to have 3 wonderful speakers talking to you about what the Inflation Reduction Act means in their industries, trying to hit as broad a range of the impacts of what is a very wide-ranging bill as we can. As you will hear, it is not all sunshine and rainbows, though I imagine there are probably a lot of supporters of the action in this room. But there are some sections of it that will be difficult for some folks. So first up, we have Rachel Eades. Is that who I actually had the pleasure of going to school with and have recently reconnected with as she came back to work for Revision Energy. So ladies and gentlemen, Rachel. Or you can say seated if you want. Your choice. Okay.
That's a mobile mic. You can grab that.
Yeah. Your call. Sorry.
Hello.
Hey.
Good morning. Thank you, Sam, for the introduction. For those of you still looking for seats, there are some over here towards the front. So please make friends with your new neighbors. Come on in. There's room for everybody to hear all the exciting news about the Inflation Reduction Act. As Sam mentioned, my name is Rachel Eades. I'm here on behalf of Revision, where I work on the commercial team. And I am lucky to be one of 370 and counting employee owners of Revision Energy. I happen to be based out of our Brentwood, New Hampshire branch. We also have an Enfield, New Hampshire location, along with 2 in Maine, South Portland and Montville, and 1 in North Andover, Massachusetts. We are proud to be an 100% employee-owned company and a certified B Corp. And we recently gathered as a whole group, as you see here, just a couple weeks ago at Alnoba in Kensington, New Hampshire, for the first time since pre-COVID. So it's brilliant to be all together and share our creativity and energy for this cause. This crazy group of kids here has installed over 14,000 clean energy systems in New England since 2003. As a company, we're getting ready to celebrate our 20th birthday, which, as solar companies go, is ancient, but something we're quite proud of and plan to be here for the next 20, 40, and generations to come. We're also proud to be the #1 rated solar rooftop installer here in New England. As I mentioned, I work on our commercial team, so I spend my days helping New Hampshire's biggest energy users, schools, businesses, towns, to transition to clean energy through large-scale solar projects. And in my role, that's how I carry out Revision's mission. But everyone you saw in that photo there is working every single day to empower our communities to overcome the environmental, economic, and social inequity caused by fossil fuels, so our kids and grandkids and future generations can enjoy New England's clean air, water, and land just like we do today. So that's why I'm here, and I'm excited to speak to a room with so many people who I know share this same sentiment, and how we can all work together to take advantage of some of the new news that's come out in our world since August of this year. I wanted to first ground us in the opportunity for solar here in New Hampshire. As a reminder of where we sit on the globe, New England is on par with places that are traditionally considered a bit sunnier, like the French Riviera or Spain. But we actually get the same amount of sunlight hitting us here in New England as those traditionally sunny places do. But not every state in New England is taking advantage of this natural gift in the same way. In New Hampshire, 1.2% of our electricity as a state comes from solar. In our neighbors that we happen to work in as Revision, next door, Maine, that's almost 5%. And in Massachusetts, it's a whopping 20% of the state's electricity needs from solar. And that's not because they get noticeably more sunshine in those 2 neighboring states than we do, when you think about the whole globe, nor do they operate under different federal regulations. That's all down to choices they've made as a state. So while it's going to be very exciting to hear about what provisions are included for solar in the Inflation Reduction Act, I do want us to all remember that federal incentives are only one piece of the puzzle, and a lot of the rest is up to what we choose to do as a state of New Hampshire to help grow the penetration of solar in our state's grid up from 1.2%. So the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, What is in that thing? Well, there's a lot in it. And it's not just about energy, whether your thing is corporate taxation or reducing prescription drug prices. There's a lot in there. But for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about what it means for solar here in New Hampshire. So that's a tiny sliver of what's in this big, monumental, historic act. But hopefully it'll be something that's helpful and practical for all of you guys as homeowners and representatives from the organizations across the state. So if I was to pick out one headline number from the Inflation Reduction Act, it would be 30%. 30% tax credit for solar projects. And the government here is being a bit like Oprah. 30% for you in residential, for you as a business, and even for you back there, nonprofits and municipalities, which I want to talk about. So everybody gets 30%, which is really exciting, and it's 30% for the next 10 years. I'll talk a bit about residential first, but then spend most of the time talking about business, nonprofits, and municipalities, because I see that as the biggest opportunity for us here in New Hampshire. But we're all probably homeowners, or soon hope to be, and so residential solar does have a 30% tax credit. And I should also note that storage can now qualify for a 30% tax credit, whether or not it's paired with solar, which is a difference from where we were before August. But that's pretty simple. So the residential tax credit, Section 25D, 30%, that's the number you want to remember. Thinking now about the world I live in of commercial solar, so businesses, schools, towns, nonprofits. Pre-August, and throughout this year, the investment tax credit for solar was 26% of the total project costs you could get back in your taxes from the federal government. And that was scheduled to step down to 22% next year, and then just 10% from 2024 onwards. The Inflation Reduction Act increases that to 30% for this year and for every year following out to 2032, and even beyond if the US have not met their climate change goals. So this certainty, this is a runway. If you've been thinking about solar, this is the time to invest in it in any way, shape, or form as a homeowner, as a business, as a manufacturer, as an installer. Now, in order to get the 30%, you have to meet any one of three conditions. Projects have to be under 1 megawatt in size. If they're over 1 megawatt, you need to have already started or start within 60 days of the Department of Treasury's guidance. If you're over 1 megawatt and you haven't already started, then you need to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So what are those? Essentially, prevailing wage is to encourage large solar projects, so again, over 1 megawatt, to make sure we're paying the people who are doing the work on the ground to realize the clean energy revolution fairly. And that's a value that's been near and dear to our hearts at Revision for a long time. But I think this is an excellent market signal for large projects across the whole country to ensure that workers are paid a fair wage. What exactly that is will be determined locally by the Department of Labor. Guidance expected in Q1 of 2023, certainly something we'll keep an eye on. But the second piece of this is around apprenticeship requirements. We know that as a nation, we need 1 million more electricians to join the trade in order to achieve the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act and to get to where we realistically need to be as soon as possible. But we can't just magic up electricians out of thin air. So I encourage everyone, this is now a shameless plug for becoming an electrician with Revision Energy, to talk to people in your life who want a career change, who love being outside, who love solving problems, who want to get involved with the clean energy transition. We need more apprentices, not only nationally, but here in New Hampshire. The Inflation Reduction Act requires 12.5%, stepping up to 15% by 2024 of construction project hours to be carried out by an apprentice. And if you want to learn to be an apprentice and work towards your journey person license, you can come join the Revision Energy Training Center, where you'll learn on the job. It was actually the first in the nation in-house training program, started back in 2018 to build our own clean energy electricians from within house. And we recently at our company-wide gathering celebrated the first graduates of that 4-year program who've achieved their journey person license. But we need more. New Hampshire is aging, and particularly our electricians are aging. So that's a call to action for any of us here to take away with you today. But coming back to the IRA, it is built into the incentives to acknowledge that we need more in the workforce and to require that companies are building that workforce through apprenticeship requirements on large solar projects. All right, back to some nice numbers. So 30%, that's the number we're going to remember for the investment tax credit. But the Act also includes bonus tax credits. And what these are designed to do is incentivize putting solar in places that we know we need it, with the materials we know we need, but in ways that have historically been a bit challenging, more costly, or just haven't been deployed to the degree we know we need them to be. So for example, there are adders for using domestic content, for building on brownfield sites, in low-income areas, and for affordable housing. I'll talk through each of those in more detail, but a few other provisions that are worth mentioning before I do. One is that these are stackable. So for example, if I'm interested in a solar project that is in a low-income area and I'm using 100% of steel iron from the US, I can stack those bonus tax credits to get, say, 50% or even more, potentially, in total project costs back through my taxes from the federal government. Another real win within the legislation is that utility upgrades can now be included in total project cost. If anyone's tried to develop a solar project recently or under the kind of previous set of rules, utility upgrades can get very expensive very quickly. Now, they can be considered part of the total project cost, so your 30% or 40% is off the total project cost, including any utility upgrades. The 3-year carryback provision is new. The investment tax credit for solar, you were always allowed to carry it forward 20 years, so if you don't have the tax liability in the current year, you have a few years to use it. Now you can go back 3 years, so if you paid a lot of taxes in the most recent 3 years, you can refile and use those. There's also a clause for one-time transferability. If you are, for example, a solar developer, you can now transfer the tax credit only once to someone else, another tax-paying entity, as an option, and potentially it has to be paid for in cash. So it's a bit complicated. Standalone storage projects, as I mentioned, are now included as part of the ITC. Previously, it was only if they were paired with solar when installed, but now we can use storage a lot more flexibility. The Inflation Reduction Act also defines storage more broadly, so it's not just batteries, but anything that stores energy, including things we may not even have invented yet. And finally, direct pay for tax-exempt entities. I mentioned at the beginning that everybody gets 30%, which is probably a bit of an exaggeration. There are some, obviously, detail in there. It's never going to be that simple. But for me, one of the biggest announcements that came out with the Inflation Reduction Act is that organizations that were traditionally excluded from these federal incentives can now partake. So previous to August, when I was working with a nonprofit, maybe a school or a town, there was really only one good way to finance a solar project and access the tax credit provided by the federal government. And that was through a power purchase agreement, which is kind of a roundabout way of accessing the tax credit by letting an investor who does have tax liability own the project for the first 5 years. Now nonprofits essentially have two choices if they want to finance a solar project. The way this is set up, and the rules are still being written, I should note, it's under an open consultation period, so if anyone has ideas, feel free to contact the Department of Treasury. I'm sure they'd love to hear them. But the idea is that nonprofits can now take advantage of a tax credit as if they were paying taxes. So that 30% that they would get if they were a tax-paying entity, they can now get as a direct pay government check for that same value. In terms of who's considered a nonprofit, there is some gray area yet to be ironed out, but essentially in New Hampshire, nonprofits, municipalities, rural energy co-ops, tribal governments are all listed. And one little caveat at the end is that in future years, in order to receive direct pay, you will have to comply with domestic content. So what is domestic content? This is the first of our 4 adders for that bonus tax credit. Domestic content is set up to encourage manufacturing of all the materials we need for clean energy here in the US. So from 2024 onwards, in order to get this adder, you need to be procuring 100% of steel or iron from inside the US and 40% of manufactured goods, So for example, solar panels. That manufactured good percentage steps up to 45, 50, and then 55% of manufactured goods that are included in your project sourced from within the US from 2027 and onwards. I mentioned the nonprofits complying with this. There is a runway because unfortunately we can't, again, snap our fingers and make a lot more factories tomorrow in the US, but there is a manufacturing tax credit. So if anyone out here has big dreams to build a factory here in New Hampshire to produce any component related to clean energy, you now also have the go-ahead from the federal government and will receive the 30% tax credit. The second adder is technically called energy communities, but it includes brownfield sites, which is really the relevant part for us here in New Hampshire. This is to incentivize building clean energy systems on land that's pretty much unusable otherwise, or has traditionally relied on the production of energy, but from the extraction of fossil fuels, which we know we need to move away from. So for example, if you live in a community that relied primarily on the extraction of natural gas, oil, or coal, or where a coal mine or plant was closed since 2009, you'd be considered an energy community. Don't have a lot of those here in New Hampshire. But what we do have are brownfield sites, which also fall under this adder. The EPA has helpfully already identified 300 different sites in New Hampshire that are suitable for clean energy development. These are landfills, Superfund sites, brownfields, things that for a community could be a potential liability, but by adding solar or wind or other clean energy technologies, turn it into an income generating asset for the community. And there's not much else you can do with that land. So I think personally, building clean energy on these types of sites is one of our best moves forward as a country. And so seeing an incentive to make this happen is brilliant, but like Sam said, not everything is just dollar signs. These also come with their challenges. You see ballasted racking in the background photo there. For sites where you can't penetrate into the ground, we ballast on top. That has extra cost. Permitting, which we brought up in the morning session today, can be its own hurdle. So these incentives exist to make things that are particularly challenging more possible for organizations going forward. The next adder is plus 10% for low-income communities. The map to my left is of new market tax credit areas within New Hampshire. You can see a lot in the North Country, but throughout the entire state, designated low-income areas, which, if they have poverty rate over 20% in the locality, regardless of project type, will be eligible for the adder. I should note that this is an allocated tax credit. So the US government has allocated 1.8 gigawatts, which if they don't use in 2023, will be carried on to the next year. So it will be something that you apply for. But again, we know we need to deploy clean energy in the communities hit first and worst by climate change, and the ones who have not traditionally had access to things like a large-scale solar project. So this adder exists to help us do more of what we know is already a good idea for our state. And it pairs nicely with the fourth adder, which is 20% for affordable housing projects. Now, these projects need to be located on a low-income residential rental building, HUD-approved programs, and other qualified low-income economic development or housing programs. And the projects must locate at least 50% of the benefit to the residents themselves. It's no good to come in and develop a project and not share that with the low-income residents who are living there. And I just want to give a shout out to Carmen Lawrence and Lakes Region Community Developers who are actually in a concurrent session right now for this Guilford Knolls project. Also for resident-owned communities, on the previous slide in the background was Mascoma Meadows, first solar array we built on a rock resident-owned community here in New Hampshire. There's been a lot of this good work started, but we need more. Anyone who works in housing in general knows we need more affordable housing, and pairing it with renewable energy has sometimes been difficult, but hopefully this federal incentive will make it more possible for developers and communities to pair affordable housing projects with clean energy from the get-go. Finally, I'll just call out that there's a ton of funding in here for grant and loan programs. So if anyone has thought of applying for a grant in the past or a loan, there's now more money to support these programs. Everything from $29 billion to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $5 billion to climate pollution reduction grants, climate justice grants, an extra $3 billion for low and moderate income communities, $40 billion to the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, $1 billion additional loans, renewable energy electrification in rural areas. And finally, the REAP grant, Renewable Energy for America program, extra funding of $1 billion and an increase in the granted amount of aid to 50% of total project cost, up from 25 at the moment. So to finish where I started with this beautiful photo of the Dover High School array, I'm actually lucky enough to be up on that roof and take a look at it in real life. And this, I think, is what the Inflation Reduction Act hopefully means for New Hampshire. More of this. More for schools, for nonprofits, more rooftop solar. I think the main thing that the Inflation Reduction Act has done is provide the market signals that renewable energy, and solar in particular, is now for New Hampshire. So if you're a private company looking to invest and you want a signal, 30% for 10 years is a pretty good signal. It also provides the incentives for what is the right thing to do. We know it's a good idea to build on brownfields, to help support low-income communities, to have more renewable energy, and to be using US-made goods and services. But the federal government is only one piece of the puzzle. So remember, we as the state of New Hampshire can control a lot of the solar policy and shape the rest of the opportunity. What the federal government can offer is a brilliant piece, and I would argue this is all pretty much positive news, but in the near term, it's not going to magically alleviate cost pressure. We've seen through inflation and supply chain constraints that are probably still with us for a good 18 months as those factories come online, things like that. The utility grid, it's aging and needs to be upgraded. That's not gonna magically go away because of this act. And labor constraints, as I mentioned. So not to end you all with a bunch of cold water, but I think considering the Inflation Reduction Act in the context of where we're at in New Hampshire and the challenges we do have, I think for the medium and long term, these are brilliant signals for how much solar we're going to be able to do together here in New Hampshire and increase that 1.2% penetration. I look forward to answering all of your questions, but I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Back behind the very tight podium, next up, Dan Bennett from the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association, talking about the EV tax credits. Dan, do you want to take the mobile mic or you want to come stand here?
I'm actually going to sit because between the clicker, the mic, and the notes I'm going to flip through, everything's going to line up on the floor.
All right.
So, thanks. And great job on your presentation. Thank you. I'm Dan Bennett with the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association. What we are is a trade association for the motor vehicle industry in New Hampshire. Car, truck, motorcycle, snowmobile, ATV, construction, farm, franchised, and independent. So about 500 businesses in all corners of the United States. Excuse me, in all corners of the Union. Did everybody do a ride drive today? Yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. Please know that Jessica Wilcox, who puts that thing together, as well as the dealers, and that's just the general enthusiasts who loan their cars for you to drive around Manchester. It's a really hard thing to pull off. So they do a ton of great work on these ride drives, so please take advantage of them. And quite frankly, the minute that we get your butt in the seat of the EV, it's a pretty easy conversion. So, I'm going to sit during my presentation because I've got a lot of notes and scribble and stuff that I want to flip through. So what I'm going to talk about today is the IRA, okay, and specifically the components of the new EV tax credit. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. The used EV tax credit, my favorite part of the IRA, transferability. Sam makes fun of me for calling it cash on the hood, but that's what it's going to be. So we're real excited about that. I'll briefly bullet out a couple other provisions that you all might be interested in, and then we'll get to, I guess, we'll save the Q&A for the end. So August 16th, signed into law the IRA. A whole bunch of components on climate and energy initiatives. A whole great deal of them are staggered. Some of the tax credits or tax issues for us went into effect immediately, and they last out as far as 2032. So the EV specific provisions I mentioned, credits for new and used, there's alternative fuel, there's commercial manufacturing, there's also some stuff for electrifying the Postal Service fleet. So the tax credit concept on EVs is not new. There's been one around for a while. It's a $7,500 tax credit. at the end of the year when you do your taxes. It's $7,500 for battery electrics, and then in some cases for hybrids, you can get the full 75, or based on battery length, life, distance, you can get potentially a little bit less. There was always this pesky little manufacturer quota. After 200,000 vehicles, the tax credit went away. General Motors and Tesla are already there. Toyota is there, and they're in the wind down mode under the regime or the scheme of the old tax credit. So most of it is still in effect, but it goes away at the first of this year. And the big deal with this one is they modified the final assembly requirement, which means where the vehicle and its batteries or components needs to be made. And this is one of the negatives that came with the IRA, is that the eligible vehicle list used to have about 75 of them, vehicles on the list. And the minute that this came into effect, the list was chopped, and there were only 25 eligible vehicles based on country of origin, production, stuff like that. So what we had hoped for was more of an on-ramp, and there is discussion in Washington about that. But whether you think something will actually be done by first of the year, we doubt that. But there's at least discussion. Some great product is left off the eligible vehicle list between now and the end of the year, and even going forward. The good news is you're starting to hear from the manufacturers that the goal is being achieved. Polestar is saying they're going to do all their manufacturing in 2024 in South Carolina. Honda just unveiled a $4 billion investment in a plant in Ohio to do EVs. So it's spurring that move of the marketplace. It's just in the short term, there's a little bit of pain right now. So like I said, unfortunately, some great product is now ineligible. So the new vehicle tax credit, I've got some extra notes in here somewhere on it. It goes into effect on the first of the year. Okay, it's still $7,500, but it is split into two components: $3,750. One is for the battery components. The other is for the critical mineral content. I'll get into those two, what those two mean, in a slide ahead. There's also these other eligibility requirements that have never been in place before. Income caps, you can see up there, 300 for joint filers, 225 for head of household, and then 150 for single filers. There's also, and this is brand new, to MSRP caps. Okay, so $80,000 for pickups and SUVs, and then $55K as a MSRP for sedans. Okay, so what this is going to hopefully do is force the manufacturers, the OEMs, to lower their pricing models, because as you know, many of the current EV models that are out there can blow way past those numbers pretty quickly. And then there's the final assembly provision that I mentioned earlier in the old tax credit. That's a requirement. One of the positives is that it moves the pesky manufacturer quota that I mentioned. Okay, so that 200,000 vehicles is out the window. So as of first of the year, GM, Toyota, and Tesla are back in the game, which is great that their vehicles are tax credit eligible. And then there's also this other component that'll come into play later in 2024 and 25, which is that none of the products in the supply chain for the vehicle can come from a foreign entity of concern. So the two easiest examples there are China and Russia. So the vehicle eligibility that I mentioned is you got your battery components right there. It has the Made in America provision. You get your $3,750 for it. It's about the percentage of components that are made or manufactured in North America. And then the percentage increases move up over year. I think it's 40% in 2024, and it scales up to 80% by 2027. So critical minerals is another one. And critical minerals are cobalt, graphite, lithium, nickel, a few others. Okay, and it's the same thing as the battery components. 3750 percentage of minerals processed or extracted in the U.S. or free trade countries, and then percentage increases over the years too. So as I mentioned earlier, what a lot of this does is it starts to move some of the manufacturing or sourcing to the United States. So evidence of that is that the first cobalt mine in over 30 years is opening in the United States in Idaho as we speak. Okay, so I don't know how you feel about mining or cobalt mining. I know my 2 dogs are named after my favorite ski area in Idaho. I hope that it is nowhere near there, but these provisions like that are moving some of that production extraction into the U.S. So there's also this new concept with the IRA, which is the used vehicle tax credit. We've never had a tax credit for used vehicles, so this is a really innovative one as well. And this one is effective first of the year as well. Okay, so it's $4,000 or 30% of the vehicle price, whichever is less. The transferability that I'm going to talk to a little bit is available come first of the year 2024. Okay, the vehicle has to be 2 years old, and it has to be under $25,000, and it has to be sold by a dealer. So it can't be a Facebook Marketplace front lawns kind of sale. It's got to be from a licensed dealer in the state. Doesn't have to be franchised or independent, as long as they're licensed with the DMV and Department of Safety. So the problem with it as we speak right now is that when anecdotally and asking around to dealers is that there's not a whole lot of vehicles in the marketplace right now that meet the 2-year $25,000. But the market, it's going to get there as there's more vehicles in place. Newer product is coming out at a raging pace, which means folks are starting to flip to get the newest, greatest models. So that'll start flooding the used marketplace a little bit. The credit is limited to 1 every 3 years. Okay, so it can't be a 12-month flip. And there's income caps in place. They're a little bit lower than the one for the new vehicle tax credit. You can see there, $150 for joint filers, $112.5 for head of household, and $75 for single filers. So my favorite part of it, as I mentioned, the transferability, the cash on the hood. New Hampshire has a proven success when we start to incentivize the marketplace as it comes to vehicles. We've got great success with solar. And vehicles, we've only really had one instance of it, and that was the Cash for Clunkers program under the Obama administration. Okay, trade in that dirty polluter and get $4,500 on the hood of your vehicle. New Hampshire had the highest take rate per capita in the nation for Cash for Clunkers. So maybe we drive a very aged fleet. Maybe we're very thrifty. Yankees, I don't know what it is, but a super high take rate. So we've shown that cash incentives in the marketplace help people flip cars. So the transferability credit comes into play January 1st, 2024. Okay. And what it is instead of taking that $7,500 on your taxes at the end of the year, you can transfer that credit to the dealer at the time of sale. The dealer can then take that $7,500 and reduce the purchase price of the vehicle. And that's all they can do, okay? They can't give you half on the car and half in a check to walk out and buy a snowmobile, okay? It's got to be towards the purchase price of the vehicle, but you can maximize up to that full $7,500 credit, lower the price, cash on the hood of the car. The dealer has to be registered with the IRS, and there's going to be a system that they're going to put the dealer through, put you through, verify that the vehicle is eligible, verify that you are eligible as well. We're actually really glad to see that the program is in the hands of the IRS. Cash for Clunkers was managed by NHTSA. It was a debacle. NHTSA has no systems built up to take in, let alone distribute monies. And there were dealers that went to their own wallet to fund the incentives. And then they were out at sometimes millions of dollars for weeks, millions of dollars that's used for payroll and facility investments, that they couldn't get back from NHTSA. So we're very, very glad to see that the program will be handled by the IRS, who, fortunately or unfortunately for some of us, are very used to both taking in our money, but also giving it back to when appropriate and necessary. So we're glad to see it in good hands there. They will develop this portal that the whole thing will be done with. For the customer, it's going to be on-site, seamless moment of there's no delay. It's going to happen when you walk out of there. That vehicle is going to be lowered by that price. And they did, in fact, also put a, although the portal hasn't been developed, and we're actually kind of glad to see that it's not till 2024 because they need to develop it. We hope that they get it done sooner and they have the ability to roll it out earlier. That remains to be seen. But they did put a penalty in there, and it's on the customer. If the customer, for some reason, forges information or gives false information, maybe they, underestimate their gross income, and then it's found out that they in fact did that, they will be assessed a penalty over and above the amount that they took the credit for by at the end of the year. So there's a lot of well, let me go to this one first. So some of the other issues that are in this related to EVs and tax credits. There's a tremendous amount of, with this transferability, dealer disclosure is going to happen between the customer and the dealer. Like there's not enough paper passed between the two of you at the time of sale, right? It's not as bad as buying a home, but it's pretty darn close. So be prepared for additional disclosures, laying all out the terms and everything. The credits do expire in 2032. These programs go away. And then I mentioned earlier a few of the other kind of vehicle-related tax credit programs that are in the IRA. I specifically spoke about the 30D program is what it's called. There are some great infographics out there that we or Clean Energy can share, and many of our partners, the folks at DES. There's some real great infographics that you can use to share to interested parties or hand out to folks who have questions that really kind of lay this out very simply and walk you through it. This is a great one that was made by the National Auto Dealers Association to talk about the timeline. This is another one that was created by the CARE group to kind of let you know the whens and wheres and really put thousands of words into pictures, which we all know is a lot of times easier. So that's really all I have. Here's my contact info. It'll be available. Snap a picture of it. Please, if there's anything that I can help with or any information or any contact I can put you with, maybe it's your local dealer. I don't care who you buy it from as long as you buy it in state. That's all I ask. I don't play favorites except for the 4 borders. So I guess we'll do questions and answers at the end. Is that what we're doing? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you for your time.
Last but not least, Dave Hazel from Mitsubishi.
Good afternoon, everyone. No. Good afternoon, everyone. Better. I know it's after lunch. We've got that little bit of a lull working there, so hopefully I can wrap us up, bring us home, and explain this very complicated situation in a very simple way. I'm going to explain some of the information that was given to me by my colleagues and team who's been working behind the scenes to try to understand and navigate through what this Inflation Reduction Act does to the heat pump market specifically, and the high-performance heat pump that Mitsubishi manufactures, and many of you are very familiar with. You've been hearing about them forever and today, and you will continuously as this evolves. So, again, Dave Hazel's. Oh, thank you. All right. All right. Yeah. How's that? Better? Okay. Again, Dave Hazel's my name. So. I've been with Mitsubishi now for coming up on 17 years in various capacities, working with our distribution, our 2-step distribution model through contractor relationships and development, and also recently, I'm the senior manager of performance construction. I took on a new role recently that deals with the development of the technology through architects, engineers, builders, developers who are implementing high-performance homes, electrification, decarbonization efforts that we're all part of in this industry right now. So the Inflation Reduction Act takes on a lot of elements that we thought were needed to be implemented and now we find are coming to fruition. Some of these slides have a lot of words on them. I'll try to pick out the most important parts and be relevant that way for you here. We're talking a lot of money, obviously, here. And obviously, Rachel and Dan have already explained what it means in your respective areas of what you do. How it relates to what we do, it's going to be $369 billion of new energy security and climate change investments poured into what is going to be a future of where we think is much, much needed for the electrification efforts. To get to our goals in 2030, we've got a lot of work to do. If we just do business as usual currently with the current programs that are in place prior to the Inflation Reduction Act being implemented, we would have about a 24 to 35% meeting of the 2005 target that we tried to get to for 2030. This brings it down now to up to a 44% meeting of that goal, which is a 50% reduction from 2005. So it's pretty aggressive, and I think the government did a great job on putting together what is needed for us to take a serious look at where we can implement these funds. So it consists mainly of two primary factors or focus areas. One is tax credits, and the other are rebate programs. I'll get to the tax credits and rebate programs in a little bit more detail, talking through how the rebate especially the rebate programs may not be what we intend, will not result in what we think they will be once the local state energy departments, state energy offices implement their own versions of what they have for a plan to implement them once the money is dispersed. So it could result in low and medium income housing focused, or it could be more dispersed across the board evenly. We don't know yet. Tax credits. So let's talk about the five main areas. The first two up there is a 25C and the 45L. The 25C is an area that mainly works with the residential homeowners side of the tax credit. So that is going to be implemented through a measure by if a homeowner, excuse me one second here, I lost my train of thought. Okay, they must purchase qualifying equipment first of all, and that's still to be determined by what equipment wheel manufacturer or other ductless manufacturers will be putting into the program that would qualify. Once that part is, once the 10-year, it extends from it was 10%, now it's 30% of a tax credit. Let me come back to that in a minute here. The 45L is mainly for builders, contractors who are building new homes that meet the Energy Star level of a build will get a $2,500 per home rebate, and if it meets a net zero ready standard, it would get up to a $5,000 rebate back as well. Multifamily also has a $500 per meeting Energy Star and $1,000 per a net zero ready multifamily application. If they use prevailing wage workers on the job sites, then that doubles to the $2,500 and then $5,000 as well. So there's a provision put in there for a tax incentive for the builders and then also back to the homeowners, again, which is this 25C. Also a rebate called the HEREP, which is an offset by demonstrating a reduction of the energy usage in a home. Up to 35% would have based upon a formula that would reduce the state energy offices. Must collect the funds 2 years. Okay, let me come back to that one in a second here as well. It's a more complicated formula because it's based upon having an income requirement be met. So if you're 80% or less than your median income in your area, which is generally determined by the county, then you get the full amount of rebate qualification be made to you. If you make between 80 and 150% of your area's median income, then it is 50% or half of that amount. And if you're over 150% of your median income within that household, then you don't qualify at all for this rebate in particular. There's also a homes element that is an abbreviation there for described in a way that brings a reduction by having. I'm totally messing this up. I'm sorry, folks. But luckily, I have all this in a documented form that we put together that can help everybody explain it better, help everybody understand it better, because I'm not explaining it very well at all. But suffice to say, there's a lot of money that's going to be poured into this program that we can, as we navigate through into next year, and beginning from 2023 forward, we feel once the state energy offices come together with a plan and determine what it is they're going to show to the Department of Energy, how they're going to disperse the money in a method that's acceptable by the Department of Energy, then the monies can be dispersed. But we just don't know how that's going to look right now. These are components that I've listed in here that are in the Inflation Reduction Act currently, but I don't want to stand here and say this is how it's going to end up looking for you as homeowners or anyone implementers in the room or anyone else who has an investment into what the electrification and the future of our industry is going. There's also a commercial energy efficiency tax reduction element built into it as well. Again, still a little murky as to how that's going to be finally implemented once it's decided upon, but these are the components that we think is going to be part of it, and the main thing is up to a $5 per square foot if they can, if architects and commercial building owners can implement equipment that would reduce their energy use on the grid. Closing thoughts, finally, huh? Whew. Glad we're here. We don't expect the utility rebates, however, to go away, and that's a good thing, because utility rebates are, in New Hampshire, I know they fluctuate, and we've had other discussions in other sessions about that, but this is all on top of all the utility programs that are out there, from what our understanding is. Again, the state energy offices each have to come up with their own plan, submit that to the Department of Energy. Department of Energy has to approve it, and then let the monies begin to flow. That means 50 states with 50 different Department of Energy offices implementing their own version of how much or how little they want to implement of the Inflation Reduction Act funds. So, with that said, we'll do Q&A, and maybe I'll do better at that point. So, thank you.
So, folks, we had to dim the lights. My understanding is a little hard to read the black slides, so it got a little intimate there at the end. We've got about 20 minutes for Q&A. I am happy to sort of repeat questions if it's hard to hear them from the audience, but I'm also happy to prime the pump, but I just wanted to check and see, do folks have questions right off the bat, or should I? All right, we've got questions right off the bat, so let's just go right to the crowd.
Sure, the EV tax credit. So it's generally agreed that EV tax credits are one of the most expensive ways of cutting CO2. It's generally over $350 a ton for every dollar the federal government spends on EV tax credits. And the changes didn't really change that. So, for instance, they brought Tesla back in the game, but Tesla has sold cars as fast as they can make them for almost 3 years now with no federal tax credits, suggesting that the tax credits on Tesla were literally just money given to people who want to buy Teslas anyway. Secondly, the used car credit makes 0 sense from a climate standpoint. If I own an EV and then I sell it to someone else, that doesn't magically let both of us drive around in the same EV. All you've done now is made the EV more expensive. So you have to at least $400 or $500. And finally, it's hard to see how all these domestic contact rules are going to survive the WTO. I just don't understand it.
So Dan, do you want to take that question? Thoughts about the used EV tax credit, for instance, thoughts about the cost of these tax credits. I imagine to a certain extent the income caps might have some.
The waste, the people that are currently getting EV credits to buy cars just.
Sure, why don't we let Dan take that question?
The used credit is probably more than offsetting.
Yeah, I think what it's about is to get those emissions reductions, we need more EVs on the road. These tax credits make them more accessible to more people that can't, the folks that can't afford the $88,000, Tesla. This is opening the door for tons of people to get into EVs that never could break into that market. So, I mean,
you yourself admitted there are going to be very few used EVs.
Initially, yes. And some of those folks will flip those Model S's that they're in right now, and those then will enter that marketplace. But
why don't you let him answer the question? No, but really, why don't you let him answer the question?
So I guess, it's about accessibility, and it may not move the needle as far as you would like it to, but this is opening the door to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other people to get into this marketplace and really spur it. And we think on both the used and the EV, it's going to help. It's certainly not going to hurt, right?
But it's a question of how much money you're going to spend for each type of car. If you're making this climate bill, now if it's to help out EV dealers and all that, and make sure that you have to buy from the dealers, that's another purpose. But in terms of reducing fighting climate change, which is the alleged purpose of this bill, it's an enormously expensive way to do it. And
that sounds like a statement rather than a question. Why don't we move to the next? We have someone saying next year.
Bring down the cost of EVs as well, because they set those caps.
if you have the credit,
Next question. So they're in the back. And you can shout it out. I'll try to transfer it onto the next.
I just have a question about the direct payments to nonprofits for solar arrays. So if we have a $100,000 solar array that we want to get from Revision or church or some other nonprofit, and we don't want to have to raise the money up front to pay the whole $100,000, when are you going to get that direct payment, and would you or any other solar installer be given that directly from the government so that we wouldn't have to raise that money up front?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually not even the first time someone's asked me that today. And I suppose my quick answer is there's a lot about the direct pay that we don't know yet that's being written during the rulemaking phase. The transferability that I mentioned is specifically mentioned for the tax liable side of things. So I think what you're mentioning there is kind of could the direct pay be transferred to the developer? And the answer to that is I don't know. But these rules are all still being written. And I think direct pay for me was one of the most exciting provisions, but also probably the one that's going to need the most rulemaking because it's the most different from what's currently in there because there's nothing currently for nonprofits and for towns. But I think what it offers is a second avenue for paying for projects. So as you mentioned, if someone who doesn't pay taxes currently wants to go solar at no upfront cost, you can do something called a power purchase agreement, where the array is owned by an investor who does have tax liability for a minimum of the first 5 years, and the nonprofit has the option to buy it out. That will still exist. So that will still be the preferred financing method of choice, I'm guessing, for a lot of nonprofits here because of the benefits, as in no upfront cost, no operation and maintenance costs to the organization. But that was really the only option. So I think the second option of direct pay is going to have its own drawbacks and benefits. You're going to get greater savings the longer you're the owner of the array, but you're totally right. Having that upfront money is not something every nonprofit's going to be able to have. And whether we could bring it down through transferability is something that remains to be seen.
Wow, so many questions right here.
Is there a table that kind of details out which cars qualify for what level of rebate based on their current level of manufacture?
Yes, great question. There's a list the IRS has right now of, and if we want, come see me after. I'll give you my card. There's a direct site that you go to that lists all of the ones that are eligible, and then all of the anticipated ones from 2023 forward. Yeah,
and then there's one right next door.
I have a piggyback to the earlier nonprofit question. It's sort of threefold and a little unique, so it might not be relatable for most people here. Would you stand up? Sure. So we're implementing a solar project using grant money. So I don't know if the direct payback is eligible if you're receiving grant funds for a project. So that's the first part. The second part is we are putting these solar battery systems off grid. Is that an eligibility question? And then third, we're putting these solar panels and battery systems on property that we don't own.
So the question, in case I'm doing what I said I was going to do, I'll try to repeat the question. So first, are the tax credits stackable with grants? Second, and correct me if I got this wrong. Second, are they eligible if you're off grid? Third, are you eligible if it's somebody else's land?
All excellent questions, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with I don't know yet. There's a lot of specifics still to be laid out. I heard an analogy, which I think wasn't exactly the perfect analogy, but it's like the spirit of the law has been laid out, and the idea is to extend the benefits of a tax credit to people who don't pay the taxes. So that's what they're trying to do. How exactly they're going to do it, it'd be like saying we're going to implement speed limits so everyone drives more safely, but exactly what number and on which sections of the road has yet to be laid out. But they're great questions, and like I said, at the moment, through November 4th, the Department of the Treasury is asking for specific feedback from interested bodies and anyone. So those are the exact types of questions that will want to be laid out in that process. So yeah, Department of Treasury website, provide that feedback. Thank you for the question.
I guess this applies to all the tax credits, but are the EV tax credits in particular one-time credits for households, or could they be used, say, each year? A household wants to buy a new car in 2023, a new car in 2024. Could they use the same tax credit in subsequent years, or is it just once?
Yeah, so my understanding is that for the new credit, it could be done every year. The used EV tax credit for that particular vehicle, you're only allowed to use that once every 3 years.
And does anyone know the status of the other tax credits? Because as mentioned, that could be true of...
I know with the energy efficient home improvement 25C tax credit, there are different elements that can be taken over the next 10 years. So if you do heat pumps 1 year, you can take that amount, and then the next year, another section of the house, heat pumps again, or windows, or other elements that qualify.
Emily.
Can you clarify what parts of the act have to come through the state Department of Energy? And then we are in New Hampshire, so just wondering if we can make them take the money.
I literally grabbed the clicker because I knew I had to go back to Dave's slide. This is a very big question: is what will the state do? And if this may be a question for the whole room, but I don't know if you've had any communication with the state.
The communication I've had through colleagues that are more connected to the state than I am have said that the state is not very keen on doing a whole lot, unfortunately, in New Hampshire. What a shock, exact shocker. Can we, as a grassroots rally effort, make that attitude change? I'm hopeful of that, because this is going to be pressed from a federal level all the way through. And the presidency, no matter who it is, going over the next 10 years, is going to be pushing through these types of a program to be implemented, because the money's being set aside for it. Hopefully New Hampshire embraces that. I know Massachusetts is going to do it, Maine is going to do it, Connecticut and Vermont are all in, and they're just chomping at the bit to get this to start in 2023. How it's going to look, we're not sure, in New Hampshire is still a question mark right now.
There in the back.
The 179D, when you look at the 179D on LED lighting municipals, the design actually takes part of that credit. We're doing heat pumps in municipals. Don't we take part of that credit?
I believe so.
So the question was, can the designer take part of the tax credit? So just so folks could hear, because it was a little hard.
Yes, architects, designers are in that. I'm mentioned specifically in the wording. Yes.
Okay. Just bouncing back and forth here. Sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering, with all the tax credits and especially some of the rebates like direct pay programs, I'm wondering if the IRA has set aside some sort of verification scheme. Is it left to the IRS to verify that this money will not be going to fraud as much as it went with the stimulus packages?
Does anyone feel like? Yeah. So the question was how are we going to verify that folks have tax eligibility in order to receive these tax credits? I know we got a little bit of that answer through Dan. I'm going to presume that a lot of that we might not be 100% equipped yet to answer that question. But Dan, do you want to reiterate what you know about the EV credits?
Yeah, I mean, we've just been told for when you get to the transferability point at the dealer, that the IRS is creating a portal that is going to do that type of verification. So based on probably your taxpayer ID, maybe your social, your EIN, whatever it happens to be, they're going to verify that you're eligible. And then they've even put something in place, a penalty structure, that in the event that there is some fraud and they catch it, they'll come back at you for it. But we are told that there's going to be some type of verification system. But this whole portal right now is, as mentioned, it's on paper. You know,
right, sir.
I mean, say a commercial solar project that's going to be completed this year, would that qualify for the 3-year carryback?
So the question is, if a solar project is completed this year, would it qualify for the 3-year carryback that was in the slide?
Great question. And this is also something I should have mentioned at the start, which is that I'm not a tax advisor. I don't think the IRS will take Rachel told me so. And just to note, obviously everyone's tax situations are very different, every organization individual. So with that being said, I believe the intent is that for this year, for 2022 projects, the systems that are existing, so the ITC tax credit, 30% counts for 2022. And so I presume if you're this year, you could go back, well, definitely 2 years if they're counting it from 2023. But 3 years from now, I think going back to 2019, I believe everything is retroactive for anything after January 1st of this year for the existing tax credit. Other provisions such as direct pay and things like that don't start till 2023. But just for the regular ITC, the intent is that it's for this year as well.
So the 30% is retroactive for anything this year, but you're not sure about these carrybacks?
Sorry, let me clarify that. The 30% is for projects this year, but the carryback is if you had the tax liability in previous years. So say you're a business and you had a great couple of years, paid a lot of taxes the last 2 years, say, but then this year wasn't as good, you didn't owe the federal government very many taxes, you can go back and take it off your tax liability for 3 years previous. Or equally, you can wait, and if you have good years where you owe a lot of taxes in the future and use it up then, it doesn't all have to happen in the same year you go ahead with the solar project.
There in the blue vest.
Back to the EV tax credit. The income eligibility, does it apply to the low income person? So I don't pay any taxes, and I still get the tax.
So the question is, can someone who has no tax liability take advantage of the EV tax credits?
My understanding, as we've been told, is that you have to have paid into the system to be tax credit eligible.
So no. Yeah.
The used one has income caps as well, I believe.
Right, yeah, you have to wait for you get the full carry because of dealing
The purchaser has to transfer the credit to the dealer. The dealer then transfers it to the buyer. So the purchaser has to be tax credit eligible. Excuse me.
Right.
Yeah, another question for Dan. Who's going to be responsible for finding out what percentage of that battery in that car minerals came from?
And the question is how do we know where the battery content, where the domestic manufacturing requirements, how do we verify all of that? Good luck, Dan.
So I mean, the IRS. Like right now, you can go to the IRS and they've got a list of the eligible vehicles as well as the battery components. It's their job to maintain that information going forward, and that information is included we're told that information is going to be included in that portal of information submission as well to determine whether the vehicle is eligible. So it's all part of it.
I have also heard that there's some key definitions that have yet to be worked out. So when you say battery components, what exactly do we mean by battery components? So there's a lot, I think, that's going to be ironed out by the IRS as they write their rules. Questions? Sir?
So on the building credits, just getting back to the fraud question,
Builder gets $2,500 per unit maybe if it meets certain Energy Star requirements. So who decides whether it meets the Energy Star requirements?
The Energy Star component is by getting their approval for, I believe it is Energy Raters would determine the qualification, whether it's Energy Star, net zero, net ready, passive house.
So you'd have an energy auditor come in, do a blower door test. Yeah.
We hope that's not been stated specifically, but that would be the suggestion for the measure to be sure
So
meets
as long
it.
as that energy auditor will take a bribe under $2,500.
So other questions?
So I forget who mentioned there's a process the state needs to go through to apply for this funding, essentially. So if the state sits on its hands and says we're going to be slow to act, or maybe we don't want this money, that just means more of that available federal funding is available to other states. And it's not going to reduce any type of burden on Hampshire constituents, correct?
Let's say that the Department of Energy puts together a program. It gets accepted by the DOE. DOE says, okay, here's your money. The state has 2 years to implement that money and disperse it. If they don't disperse it within the 2-year time frame, then that money gets spent, gets diverted back to other states that are using the money effectively. Well, that was pretty clearly stated in there, so that was good.
One question I have is, could, say, utility company energy efficiency program administrators write a proposal for the State Department and submit it on their behalf, or work collaboratively with the department to do something like that? A hand in the audience there.
Kate Peters from Microsource. So we've talked a little bit to the State Department of Energy. They are seriously and thoroughly looking at these funds that are going to come as grants through the state. I don't want to speak for them. There's a lot to be figured out in terms of what the details of the requirements are going to be. But I think they're very interested in leveraging existing programs, as you said, trying to stack things for customers where it makes sense so that we don't, kind of create a confusing marketplace. We have existing rebates. How do we work together collaboratively? They may need to do an RFP for the funds. It is money that will come into the state, so it's not something that the utilities ourselves could just apply to the federal government for. But the state may do an RFP. I think there's a lot to work out, but I'm hopeful about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity. We know that weatherization and electrification are elements of our programs that are in really high demand. And I think this additional federal funding will help us in New Hampshire to kind of go after some of these goals that we're moving towards. So I'm feeling good about it, but there's a lot to figure out.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot, Kate, but I appreciate you stepping up to answer that question. So here.
Yes, I'm an energy auditor, and it wasn't an easy task to become certified. So I just want to say it's a bit insulting.
Not insulting individuals, but
I really prefer if we did not have an argument from the audience. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that it must be frustrating not having all the answers to all these questions, but in lieu of that, I wanted to say that you guys are doing a fabulous job.
So right in front.
I guess my question, this was great, okay, but it was mind-blowing. I'm sitting here, but I'm thinking, knowing how our state has been doing things and not Reggie and all that, this and that, is there a mechanism of getting this out to the public? That, to me, this is not a red or blue scenario, but how many people out there are not aware of this? And I've tried to push the state before in front of this act, and it's not easy. But I mean, it's like we could have even harder problems by not knowing and not educating people. We just don't have that all the time.
So I actually would like to hear everybody talk about that, how we get the word out about this, because it's something Clean Energy New Hampshire has been wrestling with, but I really think it's not up to one entity.
Yeah, I guess I'll take that first, but today's October 14th? Yeah. This was signed into law August 16th, right? there's still plenty of brilliant minds trying to wrap their heads around thousands of pages of this. And I think it's advocacy organizations like Sam's and his and hers and us that are going to be screaming about it and doing that encouragement and that education. So I think there's going to be a ton of voices, but still we're trying to wrap our heads around what that message is, because there's so much. I mean, it's not even 8 weeks old, and here we're trying to tell you all the details, right? So I think it's incumbent upon us to be screaming about it, and advocacy groups like his will. That's why we're here.
So I don't know if other people have thoughts about that, but
I'll just put in a plug for the Clean Energy New Hampshire webinar on October 20th at 12 p.m. if you want to hear probably a lot of the same things, but potentially more. And so thanks to everyone at Clean Energy New Hampshire for all the work that they do to get the word out. And just from our side, I mean, I talk solar all day, every day to everyone. So we'll do our best to keep communicating. But I think all of you now have a role in that. Now that you've joined us for this session, you get to go out and help us be ambassadors on this issue. So hopefully you take away even just a nugget of what we've all shared and spread it throughout your worlds.
Well, is there some type of mechanism that some type of generality of this is what's being proposed could be given out to the public?
There are a lot of resources. There are a lot of resources that are available. Certainly, I think trying to distribute them widely is the challenge, and finding the forum. But part of why I was asking that question of everyone is I think that the practitioners who are installing the services will be able to do a lot of education of their customers, and that's one way that I think it'll get out. But certainly, we're trying to do everything we can to get the word out.
Or attend less next year.
We'll set a date right now. So folks, that is the time that we have for this panel. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you all for being here.